We'll get started in a few minutes. Joey is taking some time off, so it'll just be me. Hemant is on the call. Tyler, I believe, will be joining or is joined for my team. And not sure how to see everybody here, but that's okay. All right, it's 9:30. Why don't we just get started, and then as people trickle in, that's fine. Hemant is going to attempt to record this, and we'll post it on YouTube afterwards. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about, and I want this to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions. I have the chat window open on the side if anyone wants to pop in a question. And I just want to talk about, again, the key thing is this is a draft roadmap. We're not committing to the work that I'm going to be showing. But this is kind of the stuff that we would like to do within the next period for 6.1. Let me just skip to the next slide here. So timeline. We want to kind of start having a regular 6-month release cadence. So that means that 6.1 should be coming out around the end of June, early July timeframe with the GA. And we'll have preview 1s, preview 2s, whatever, starting 3 weeks, from back. Or even from PowerShell Core to Windows PowerShell. So a lot of that is ad hoc, and we want to get that out automated. Looks like Hemant, the recording says it stopped and restarted. Hopefully we'll be able to piece it together so we have something reasonable that can be posted. Let me see, continuing. I also mentioned, I think on both GitHub issues as well as maybe on Twitter, we do have a handful of issues that we've labeled on PowerShell Core 6 as candidates that we want to consider backporting to Windows PowerShell 5.1. So again, one of the activities will be reviewing all those, making sure it's appropriate and not destabilizing Windows PowerShell 5.1, and then we'll make those changes. And those would only show up in the latest flights or releases of Windows 10 and server equivalent. Also, one other change, like some internal stuff that maybe a lot of you don't care about, but we've had some changes in ownership in some of the repos. So, recently I own Script Analyzer and Editor Services, and we'll cover hopefully the last half of this minute on Editor Services. And some of the repos that you may not be aware of, like, the OData Details, the Archive module, and some other stuff like that. And right now, a lot of them do their own thing. And so to make sure that we're following Microsoft compliance and Azure compliance, and also making it easier for our team and also making it easier for contributors to contribute across the different repos, we want to have some consistency in how you do builds and how we do releases and things like that. Just quickly look on some of the, I'll get to some of the questions in a bit. And finally, one of the things that we're working on, and primarily Joey and myself, is making sure that PowerShell Core 6 is available by default on Azure VMs. This is not a technical problem. This is more of a process policy problem. So I can make no commitment when that will happen, but we're starting those conversations. So let me just quickly look to see if there's any questions that need to be addressed right now. Versioning of docs, yes. As we move towards 6.1, we'll have to figure out what that story is. Sean Wheeler is on the call. He's our doc guy. Story around PowerShell rebooting cross-platform yet? Yeah. So I think there's two parts. I think that in the future, I want the predominant rebooting story to be SSH based. I don't own OpenSSH anymore. One of my peers does, but I'll let them talk about that more through whatever channels they have. But basically, they're working towards getting to a GA release themselves. One of the big challenges for them is getting all the changes that they've made for Windows accepted upstream. So they're working through that process. It is available as a feature-on-demand inbox in the latest Win 10 builds. And of course, the latest version is always available on GitHub. So, at some point, people should be using SSH. It is designed for that purpose. Now, for WSMan, we do want to support that from a compatibility standpoint. Yes, there's still a ton of work that needs to be done to make that work consistently, reliably. The primary scenario that we want to support for WSMan is really from Mac and Linux to Windows, and not necessarily from Linux to Linux or Windows to Linux and things like that, where you're targeting WSMan to a non-Windows endpoint. Right now, there are limitations where BASIC works pretty good. There has been work done to enable NTLM and Kerberos, but it's actually highly complex to set up Linux and Mac. In fact, I think Mac doesn't support it. But even on a Linux client, it's actually pretty difficult to set it up so that Kerbals works. And we're going to try to get some. Okay. So let me move on to. Hopefully next 2 weeks that provides more details into each of these areas. And again, you can see the ones that I have tagged as RC. We'll have those posted sometime in February. Do you say it's going to be in 601? Yes. So 601 will be the only change that we're taking from a functional perspective is we're picking up .NET Core 2.05, which has some security fixes. We're not taking any other code change from PowerShell core side itself for 601.
Quick question on, apologies, but I know we discussed release cadence in a previous call, but just question on the cadence and the expect, because, in an enterprise, we have to go through a little bit of stuff to kind of get a product in and get a package, etc. What is your expected cadence for those types of releases? So I see minor release. Are those supposed to be more frequent or intended to be sort of not in a scheduled cadence, more just kind of ad hoc, or are these minor releases following some sort of schedule?
So depends on what you mean by minor release. So using some semantic versioning, 6.1 would be minor release, and the plan, if we don't incur any huge breaking changes, we should never really have a 7x release. If you're talking about the servicing releases like 6.01, so the cadence all up is we're planning on having 6-month minor releases, meaning 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. We'll have servicing releases as needed, and those will be more ad hoc. And really, we're only going to have servicing releases if there's a major blocking or security issue. Now, in this case, 6.01 was not initially planned. We needed to have a 6.01 to fix the upgrade problem with apt and yum. Anyone that had 6.0 installed has no functional need to install 6.01 for that purpose. Now, we are picking up at least one security change in .NET Core that could impact some users. And you can read some of those details, but basically it has to deal with XML parsing. If you're not dealing with XML, you're probably not going to be impacted. And if you're not setting up the endpoint that accepts outside XML payloads, then you're definitely, I won't say definitely, but you're more than likely not be impacted. So the answer to that question is 6.01 was not originally planned, and we are going to have that. We do have, we're working towards getting servicing updates, at least on Windows, onto Microsoft Update. I don't have any kind of ETA on that. There's both technical work that we need to do as well as some process work that we need to do to make that happen. Initially, if we can get 6.01 out either end of this week or early next week, it will still be available on GitHub for Windows, and it'll be available on apt and yum for Linux and Homebrew for Mac.
Got it. So the minor releases will be 6 months cadence. The patch or service release will be ad hoc based on internal requirements or needs.
Yep.
But they will be security related most likely, or break fix. Okay, good to know. And it's also good to know you guys are moving towards semantic versioning. Some of the versioning that in the past has been difficult to interpret, so I do definitely like that.
Yes, so our intent has been to be used.
Thank you.
Let's see, is there an ETA we can, talking to Sean, a bunch of doc stuff. Maybe we can, if we want, we could maybe, after I get done with this, just spend maybe like 5 to 10 minutes just on doc stuff, and maybe Sean can talk about that. Let me just quickly go through this, do a quick time check. So for the first point, one of the things that we don't have in PowerShell Core 6 is parity with regards to how we integrate with Device Guard and App Blocker compared to Windows PowerShell, which means that if you do have Device Guard or App Blocker deployed on Windows, at this point we don't recommend that you allow PowerShell Core 6 in that environment, simply because we don't do checks for that. So that will be one of the early things we're doing in the early preview release. There's a new capability that's being worked on and this is really for one of our internal partners, but it should be useful outside as well, where today you can run signed scripts, but if you have a script that contains multiple script blocks and you just want to run a script block remotely on a target that has a constrained run space, then you should be able to do that if the script block is signed, so we're enabling that scenario. Windows PowerShell Compatibility Pack, the repo is already created. There's really nothing there today if you were to look other than a README. The idea behind this is really to leverage the .NET Core's Windows Compatibility Pack, which brings in a bunch of different .NET Framework APIs that are not part of .NET Core FX, nor is it part of .NET Standard. But basically, we can do stuff like bring back the WMI commandlets, the perf counter commandlets, and things like that. And also, we can now get rid of replace the Windows PS module path module that I have up on the gallery and add that capability here. That way, you can automatically add Windows PowerShell path to PowerShell Core 6 and use modules that work like Hyper-V. And also for the people who care or are upset about the alias stuff that happened, there will be a capability to add those back. For when this will happen, part of it is it's dependent on the .NET Core Windows Compatibility Pack, which is still in preview at this time. And it's also dependent on getting PowerShell Standard 5.1 and 6.0 libraries so we can actually build this. But hopefully we'll have a preview of this module out sometime next month. I won't say a safe bet, but it's ambitious. Concurrency in PowerShell script is something that has been talked about a lot. I think where we kind of landed internally anyways is Paul Higginbottom on my team has an existing module he's already authored a while back. He's cleaning it up now. The nice thing about his module, Thread Jobs, is it adopts the existing PowerShell job semantics, so it works the same as like a PS job, except it's a thread instead of a process. And it also has throttling built in. And yes, we are aware of community work like RS jobs, and we're gonna have that as a separate repo, and we're gonna figure out how to potentially pull it in as an experimental thing just to get feedback on that. Piece Readline 2.0, Beta 1 came out from Jason Shirk. I need to throw some of my resources to help get that to a GA quality. It is just a side project for Jason. Let me see the next thing. So next thing is a little bit more ambiguous. The way to think about it is if you bring up like a web browser, you go to Bing or Google, and you start typing, it kind of predicts what it is you're trying to type. So we want to have both local prediction as well as prediction based on customer usage. So for example, on my machine, where most of the stuff I do in my PowerShell Core 6 console is probably Git related. So if I type G, then I'd expect it to suggest I'm going to type Git. And then if I do Git, if I accept that and I do space C, then it's probably going to think I'm going to do a commit. Versus on a different user who's maybe doing management of Azure assets or doing this in Cloud Shell, then if they type G, it's probably going to be get, and maybe it's like get VM or something like that. So this is going to be very experimental, and it's going to be opt-in, and we're still trying to figure out how we're going to implement this. Along with that, the next one is just the general ability to enable and disable feature flags or experimental features. That way, if you're not interested in, new things that are not fully baked, then you don't have to use that. Or if we have like different options, then we can want the ability to have some A/B testing kind of thing. And this should be available to third parties to participate as well. Help systems and modules work that's already kind of started. I believe there's already an RC posted for that one already. It needs to be revised. The basic idea here is just along a longer term path that I want to get to is really putting more parts of PowerShell itself as modules. That way, if you're just want to manage like a headless system, then you should be able to deploy a smaller version of PowerShell that doesn't have all the interactive stuff. It's not necessarily on that target. The interactive stuff really just needs to run on your client. And the help system is one of the big things that for people don't know is the original design is part of pulling help system out as module. We want to kind of get away from MAML, which is an XML-based, somewhat proprietary Microsoft XML for help documentation, and move to just native Markdown. That way, with our PowerShell docs repo, we don't need to convert the Markdown into MAML that you download. We can just go directly through Markdown. And if we have that, then I want to just support Markdown rendering for everything, like help messages, if you want to do like a write host. If you have Markdown, we should be able to render it nicely, things like that. Especially where you have VT100, now that Windows console has VT100 support, we can do some nice things there. Sudo works over PSRP for non-Windows is more like a bug, but it's not a small bug, so I put it on this list. Like today, if you were to do even SSH remoting PSRP and you try to do sudo, it doesn't work because there's no way to prompt the user for your credentials. Enable SSH remoting. There's our RC already posted on this. We're just going to complete the work. Again, going with the theme that we want SSH remote to be kind of like the premier experience. We need to make it easier. So on a target box, you can do enable SSH remoting. You can set the client, set the server. We'll automatically update the SSHD config for you correctly. We'll detect if it's installed and stuff like that. Finally, we want to start some work to kind of bootstrap the community. There was a lot of excitement when we originally did the experimental port of PowerShell Core 6 onto Raspberry Pi for both Linux and Windows IoT. We want to actually start building out a module so that you can actually use PowerShell to talk to sensors. And a couple of members of my team already has some working stuff, and we want to just make sure we set expectations that this is a start of something that's going to be very scoped, and we're hoping the community can contribute to build it out. And that's kind of like, and this is for me, for 6 months relatively, or even 5.5 months now. This is not a small list. And again, some of these items, you envision, and it may take multiple minor releases to get to the end. Any questions on this? Let me see.
Yeah, Steve, this is Trevor. Just quick feedback on the Markdown thingy. So in the chat, Markdown is kind of useless to me in the console, but I think it would make more sense to move to a more streamlined format like YAML instead of MAML.
So here's two different things. So I think there has been requests, and I know Jeffrey supports this, is we want to maybe also make YAML a first-class system like we did with JSON. So it's not in this list, and it's probably not one of the priorities, but hopefully maybe the community contributes something. Now, as far as Markdown in the console, I think the idea is not necessarily for having all the rendering that Markdown supports. But the thing that we do want to support would be, for example, enabling backticks to highlight, commandlet names and stuff like that to make it easier to see that, or support bold and italics, support hyperlinks that in the future, if we have the console GUI work, which is not necessarily a priority for the next 6 months, which enables mouse with the cursor, you can actually click on links and stuff like that to follow different help. And also, just for the help that we have today, having the quoted code sections, we can then identify that and be able to do syntax highlighting and syntax intelligence and stuff like that. So I think there's a bunch of stuff that I agree with you, like, it's not gonna have parity with what you see like on GitHub in terms of Markdown rendering, but I think it will provide some value compared to what we have today. Yes, one of the things that we looked at was what Linux provides, which is superior to what we have today.
In regards to the feature work that you're highlighting here, where was this feature work sort of taken from or prioritized from? Is this user voice, or is this a combination of other channels?
It's not necessarily user voice. Some of it is from feedback we've heard from the community and also from our partners. Some of it is, like for example, the second one, the script block, running sign script block remotely, is a specific ask from one of our internal partners. And some of it is just a direction we want to explore for PowerShell Core 6, like the inline suggestions and interactive console, which is, unique, and I think it could be some exciting work for my engineers where they spend a lot of time doing porting work over the last couple of years. And again, based on the feedback, we can decide, hey, guess what? Maybe it's not worth investing in this because it's not proven to be useful. It's only kind of a neat hackathon type of idea. And if you guys have other things that you would like to see from a feature perspective, what I recommend is on GitHub, use the thumbs up. We do look at that. It doesn't necessarily dictate our priorities, but it also, we do take that feedback seriously.
Got it. So,
Yes.
okay, not user voice.
No, so user voice is primarily going to be for Windows PowerShell.
Got it. Okay. So since your guys aren't feature adding to that, it's pretty much a deprecated thing.
Yep. All right. Any other questions on this? Otherwise, we can maybe spend a few minutes on docs since I see a ton of comments for docs in the chat window. So Sean, maybe you want to talk about the versionings, which seems to be a thing that comes up.
Yeah, so versioning, we actually, our open publishing system has a new versioning feature that isn't, we have to now go in and retrofit the content to the new structure. And so it's going to take time to transition the docs fully. There is versioning out there today, but basically we have to create a duplicate copy of all of the content in every version. With the new system, we can specify version ranges that apply to a document or even a section of a document. So this is going to morph over time. But yeah, also the structure of the content, came from how it was laid out in MSDN, and I'm working on reorganizing that so it makes a little more sense and things are a little more discoverable. And there's just general cleanup that needs to happen. So we're working on it. Managing pull requests for community contributions every day. I do want to point out, and I put this in the chat, I recently made several updates to the contributors guide with new guidance on formatting the markdown in different scenarios. So please, if you want to do contributions, take some time and read that. There's a lot of good information there. Is the PowerShell team planning on owning PS Code PowerShell extension?
Wait, did I miss the question somewhere?
Yeah.
I'll scroll up. Oh, whenever someone types, it scrolls my window all the way to the bottom. What was the question? Can you repeat? I can't find it.
Yeah, I can just summarize it really quick. So now that the main contributor for Microsoft for VS Code PowerShell is moved on, is somebody owning up the VS Code PowerShell extension and actively working on it?
Okay. Let's maybe we can move on to that topic. So before I answer that question, so one of the things I want to do with the community called All Up is start reserving. Because I own other services VS Code integration now, I have that time for that project. So going forward, and I'll update, or I'll have Joey update the ICS file to reflect this. So you should just expect that 9:30 to 10 Pacific time will be PS Core 6 stuff, and 10 to 10:30 would be other services. roughly speaking, and we can shift that as needed depending on the topics. So the answer is yes. Unfortunately, David Wilson had moved on, although he still contributes to the project, and unfortunately he wasn't able to make it to this call. But I think he plans to participate in future calls. And I also got some of the other main contributors to editor services, like I think Keith Hill is on the call, and I'm not sure Patrick was able to make it, but he said he was able to make it. On my side, I have Tyler, who's on the call, who is the primary Microsoft full-time employee who owns it right now, but he's still ramping up in that space. He was doing PowerShell Gallery stuff previously. The community and maintainers have done to keep it going. Let's see anything else. Yep. And so I think because I'm still relatively new to the editor service project, like I don't have kind of like how I have on PowerShell 4.6 like an agenda on what I was going to talk about. I was going to keep it a little bit more free-form and we get solicit feedback from the community on what are the big things you think we should target for editor services VS Code integration. And we can talk about that. I can tell you, like, at least for me, some of the stuff that is already happening, and I appreciate, like, for example, I know Patrick has been working on getting PS Reline working in VS Code, which is going to be awesome. I think Tyler was looking into ensuring that we have a good remoting, debugging, and editing experience, and I think he validated that. So it just means maybe we want to update some documentation. There is a issue that he's also investigating related to a latest KB breaking and should I think anything other big ones? I don't know. What else you guys want to talk about for editor services? Yeah.
Well, this is a more general question. Do you have more content, or are you just soliciting just general questions at this point?
For editor services, I don't have any more content. So I just want to make this a free form kind of conversation, and we can discuss whatever topics you guys have on mind.
Yeah, I just have one. I mean, this is a general topic in regards to PowerShell Core versus Windows PowerShell. So in an enterprise, we have Windows PowerShell 5.1 we just included in our default builds and whole as well as PowerShell Core, right? So I understand, PowerShell Core provides cross-platform support, so that part's a no-brainer. I mean, getting PowerShell on our Linux plan is a big story, and I think a good win. But from a Windows perspective, from what I interpret, from what I've been reading, PowerShell Core has a lack of features compared to Windows PowerShell, at least in the interim, because there's some gaps there with .NET Core and some gap in functionality between the full suite of .NET. Some third-party modules also written to not necessarily be .NET Core compatible. So my question really is around, Microsoft's sort of recommendation in regards to how they recommend advocating using PowerShell Core, at least in this current interim state, until it has at least a very strong feature parity with Windows PowerShell, and how you run them side by side, what use cases you guys see in regards to, communicating to customers using one over the other, and how to kind of phase in use of PowerShell Core on Windows when you have Windows PowerShell 5.1 right there ready to go. I mean, I know it's a transition, but I can see some challenges there and trying to I can see customers saying, well, why would I use PowerShell Core right now on Windows if I have PowerShell 5.1? And so I was wondering if maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that and your thoughts on that.
Sure. No, I think that's a great question, and it's a recurring theme that comes up. I tweeted an article or blog that Don Jones wrote, which I think really kind of captures it. From our perspective, Windows PowerShell 5.1 is kind of complete. It's fully capable. People depend on it. People should continue to depend on it. If you're using 5.1 today, and you're not doing cross-platform, and you don't want to leverage some of the improvements to commandlets and some of the improvements in Engine, then yes, you don't really have any motivation today to start using PowerShell Core 6. However, because PowerShell Core 6 works side by side with Windows PowerShell 5.1, you could actually use both of them together and they won't clobber each other. So I think people could start experimenting that way. But yes, one of the biggest gap that we have on PowerShell Core 6 is the lack of commandlet coverage, because a lot of the existing Windows PowerShell modules, because they're dependent on APIs outside of what CoreFX provides is not compatible. So I think with the Windows PowerShell compatibility pack, that should solve some of those problems, hopefully. But one of the things that we knew we could do when we hit GA that we couldn't do before GA was really talk to a lot of our at least internal Microsoft partners and say, hey, guess what? Now that we've GA'd, you should really start starting adding to your plans, validation and if necessary porting work to make it work on PowerShell Core 6, right? So now we can actually go to, I won't pick on any specific teams, but teams that we know that they have some trouble with. I'll pick on Active Directory as one because that seems to be coming up quite often. We can talk to them and figure out what are their plans now, because now we actually have a product out there that's out of preview and they can start planning for that work. So I don't have any dates or anything at this point, but we're really starting to have those conversations now with those partner teams. So at some point in the future, we should have parity in terms of coverage, and then beyond that, we'll have more coverage than what we have in Windows PowerShell. So at some point, it's going to be a more natural transition. And because it's side by side, it should be safe in an enterprise to use both. And Joey had published the support model for PowerShell Core 6. So for an enterprise, they do, if they have enterprise agreements and whatnot, you do have a model to go through to get support if you decide to leverage PowerShell Core 6 more right now than potentially other people. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I have a follow-up, but I'll wait because I see some other questions are coming in.
Okay. I guess one other thing I'll add that maybe we haven't talked a lot about publicly, but it should be kind of obvious, right? So we don't have a plan. We literally don't have a date or a milestone to get PowerShell Core 6 into Windows. Now, I think logically, because we're not adding enhancements to Windows PowerShell at some future time, it would be desirable for my team and also probably for users to have PowerShell Core 6 inbox in Windows. That work has not started because there's a lot of challenges there. And when you're in Windows, things don't move as fast as when you're, on GitHub, for example. But don't be surprised if at some future point, side by side, PowerShell Core 6 will be an option in Windows.
Yeah, see, I like the fact that it runs side by side. So at least in that regard, you don't have to force a transition. I'm just trying to understand, is it worth pushing it out now to all our endpoints, or is it just more of a self-service thing? Hey, it's out there. You want to experiment with it, come get it. It's available. But in the interim, we're continuing to advocate 5.1 because it has all the feature-rich capabilities at this point. And then at some point, unknown at this stage, we'll completely transition, but that's probably going to be quite some time down the road, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's going to be more of the latter, because again, a lot of the work that we did for getting the PowerShell Core 6.0 release out was really about cross-platform. That is the big feature set for 6.0, which is cross-platform. And if enterprises are not managing that, or they have existing solutions, or using Python, whatever, then yeah, they can just stick with that. As we do more feature work, I'm hoping that enterprises will see the value of moving to PowerShell Core 6, and it's not something that we're forcing on them. It's something they're moving to because they see the value of it.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Let me see. DSC and PowerShell Core 6. So I think I'll just answer that briefly. I think you can use DSC. So we did some work along with the DSC team so that you can actually compile a configuration on PowerShell Core 6, and it should work both on Windows and non-Windows. Because previously you had to do the compilation on Windows and then deploy the MOF onto non-Windows if you're using DSC for Linux, for example. Outside of that, we don't have the integration yet where you can do DSC resource running in PowerShell Core 6. We do have, we're working closely with the DSC team. That's one of my peer teams, and figuring out, how to integrate everything together. But you saw a blog post maybe several months ago about the future of DSC, and I forget what they call their own project. I hesitate to call it DSC Core, but maybe that's what they called it. So things are happening, but there's nothing to announce at this point in time. Let me see. So just to clarify because I saw some of this on, I'm not sure if it was GitHub or Twitter, but yes, we're still investing in DSC. All right, so that's different. DSC is different from Windows PowerShell in that sense. There is active work happening to continue to improve DSC.
That sounds really good. Can you speak to WinRM versus SSH? That'd be a neat migration.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. So for Windows to Windows, we expect people to use WinRM, and you can use it with PowerShell Core 6. You can, again, do it side by side because we create a different configuration endpoint. So that should all just work flawlessly, hopefully, today. Like, you can do that today. Now, when you talk about Windows versus non-Windows, that's where things get a little bit tricky. The WSMan support on non-Windows is what I would consider experimental. There are cases where it works if using like basic auth, for example. There was work done on the Linux side to enable Intel Lemon Kerberos, but we've been having some challenges getting it working. And the work that was done there to enable it was done by a different team from even my peer team is a little bit further from an organizational perspective. But we try to work closely with them to figure out how to make it work. And we're going to spend some time in a 6-1 timeframe to work with them to make it more robust so that we can at least enable scenarios where you have like a MacBook and you want to do WSMan remoting to a Windows endpoint and do some management that way. So we do want to enable that scenario, but it's not complete as far as the 6.0 release is concerned. Now, longer term, OpenSSH for Windows is still happening. But I don't think there was a published date yet on when they plan to be GA, but I think it's probably safe to say it'll be this calendar year. And when that happens, then, I want to make sure that people can start moving to that as the predominant remoting story. And we still want to support WinRM and WSMan for interoperability as needed. But, you can also imagine it'd be similar to Windows PowerShell where you may get new capabilities using PSRP over SSH versus PSRP over WSMan.
Where would something like that leave GIA? Is GIA equipped to handle SSH, or would that be? So
right now, in regards to GIA, so just so everyone's clear, like GIA on PowerShell Core 6 on Windows should work the same as GIA on Windows PowerShell. GIA is agnostic to the remoting protocol, so whether you're using SSH remoting or PSRP, it should just work today. What doesn't work that I want to enable in the future is really GIA on non-Windows. So that, again, is something that has been kind of discussed previously, and it's not one of our priorities for 6.1, but maybe it's something we can look into for 6.2.
Got it, thanks.
What is let me see, hold on, let me just quickly go to some of these questions here. Can script analyzer, hold on, let's scroll off my screen. Where'd it go? Let's see, Kirk Monroe had a question about PowerShell Direct. Any plans for us using PowerShell to run PowerShell core commands in Linux VMs via invoke command? So I think that in some ways that's similar to the command-line coverage. Now that we have PowerShell Core 6 GA, I think that I don't know if it has started, but I think we always had plans to talk to the Hyper-V team to get them to support PowerShell Direct. So I don't think I have anything specific to say at this point, other than it's something we're aware of, and it's a conversation that hopefully will start soon. Let me see what else. Visual Studio was kind of brought up. So one thing I didn't mention is that we do want to enable. We did a ton of work in editor services and VS Code integration to enable VS Code is our cross-platform editing debugging story. We do want to continue to support Visual Studio. So there has been discussion internally on how we want to make sure that they also have a first-class experience. I have nothing to kind of discuss at this point, but it is something we're aware of. On the wire, perf contrast, WSMan over SSH. So the last time I did a perf test, which was admittedly a long time back, it was actually faster, surprising to me, to go over WSMan versus SSH. And it's surprising to me because WSMan is a SOAP protocol and SOAP is XML based, and all that is over HTTP, versus SSH is a purely binary protocol developed for remote shells. But optimized. Also, our WinRM implementation was highly optimized and did a lot of concurrency. So I think last time I ran a test, the PSRP over SSH was noticeably slower from a measurement point of view. I don't know if it's noticeably slower from a user point of view, but that's and there's an open item on GitHub to kind of address that. So hopefully that's a bug that we'll address. Like some of the things we know about, like PSRP inherently expects WSMan, so base64 encodes everything. because when you're putting a payload of XML into XML, you have to base64 encode it, otherwise you'll potentially get malformed XML. There's no reason base64 encode at all over SSH, so there's some obvious savings that we can do there. It's just work, and it's unfortunately kind of risky because it's all through the code. Let me see what else. So there's a question about Vim. Yes, there is still, so Vim integration with editor services is still coming. I don't have any kind of announcement. I thought it was going to come sooner than it has or has not. There's some discussion internally on how to release it, but it's still. Yes, PSRP over SSH from an end user works the same as PSRP with WSMan. It is for objects. If you don't care about objects, you can just do SSH directly and just run PWSH on the target side. Let's see. I want to make sure I didn't miss any questions up above.
Hey, Steve, maybe I missed it. I've been listening, but did you already cover the question about PS Script Analyzer?
Oh, wait.
And
I was going to, but okay. Get more love as well issues. Yes, so since I've also recently took ownership of that repo, I do plan to get more of my engineering resources looking at that repo as well. It hasn't happened yet because we were busy with the 6.0 GA and now we're busy with the 6.01. But yes, you should expect that there will be more eyeballs and activity. And Jim True on my team will be one of the maintainers on Script Analyzer repo. So, he's a pretty solid guy. He's got a ton of knowledge on PowerShell, more than I do. He was one of the original folks. So hopefully you'll start seeing that over the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And you can ping me on Twitter or whatever if you're not getting the attention you think it deserves, and I'll make sure I get that addressed. Let me see. Live object.
Hey, Steve, something else I had asked that I think got lost in the chat was around just any temporary workarounds around OpenSSH. So do we have any, recommended vendors that can maybe provide a solution in the meantime?
Can you be more specific? I'm not sure what you mean by workaround for OpenSSH, meaning what?
Well, so getting SSH running in production ready on Windows, are there any preferred vendors that provide an SSH server that you'd recommend, or anything we can do in the next year until that's ready?
There are no preferred vendors I can recommend. Unfortunately, OpenSSH, our port to Windows is not complete. We did start with work. I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head now because that was months ago when I was actually more than at least 6 months to a year when I was actually on the OpenSSH project. I think at this point, what I would recommend that for production purposes, you should not use the beta that we have by definition, and you should continue to rely on WSMan if possible, unless you're talking about non-Windows, in which case you're kind of stuck. But in those cases, you can rely on PowerShell Core 6 GA using OpenSSH on Linux, and that should be fine, and we support that. But yeah, for Windows, I don't have any recommendations on third-party solutions. I think that's the most I can say about that.
Thank you.
All right, let me see. Sandbox, PowerShell host on iOS would be possible in the future. I think regarding mobile apps, I don't know about the feasibility. It also depends on whether or not .NET Core itself supports it. And for example, in the iOS case, I'm not an expert here, but I believe Apple doesn't allow any kind of runtime outside of their own. So even stuff that is probably more feasible in Android, as PowerShell is a library that you can consume. But it's really going to be depending on them. From our point of view, we're not doing anything specific for the mobile space in terms of mobile phones. We're doing stuff for IoT, but it's going to be up to the developer to just pick us up as a library and see if those stores accept it. Let me see. It's a specific PR. I'll just put that open. What is that? Oh, the Visual Studio build. Yes. I'll get some people on that. Promise that means no way to go Windows to Linux. Yes, Joel, you are correct that there is no production ready way to remote from Windows to Linux because we do depend on an SSH client on Windows, specifically SSH.exe. Now, if you were to use a third-party production quality SSH.exe, that should just work. Presumably, it has the same parameters and switches that the OpenSSH does, so that should be compatible. But there's nothing from us for that today. SSH client inside Bash and Windows would work, right? Yes, Trevor, you are correct that if you were to run Bash on Windows, then from that console, it would, using that OpenSSH client, it could remote just fine using the Linux build of PowerShell Core 6. I guess that's one way around it, maybe. Let's see, anything else? I apologize if there was any other questions I missed. Because unfortunately, the Skype windows like to scroll to the bottom whenever there's a new entry.
I was thinking about the help. It occurred to me last week or the week before when Meltdown and Spectra was rolling. There was a PowerShell module released from the PowerShell team to test if you're vulnerable, which was great. And that was on the PowerShell gallery, so it's
Yes.
an easy way to get it. There's like 500,000 downloads,
Yep.
but there's no help. That's just an example, but it would be nice if there was some way to help out people like that, publishing their module and not force them to do a way or use the help system, but help them out, because it's stupid that you install a module created by the PowerShell team, and then I end up using Google to find the specification for the module and looking up things like that. That's a specific instance. That's okay, no problem. But I think it would be a good idea to have a way for people to publish their help on the gallery, for instance, which would be when you call help some module -online, you're redirected to whatever URL people supply, but there's not a default URL which could be to the gallery. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So
Yeah.
just one correction. So that module, which I think was awesome, that person did that work, was actually not from the PowerShell team, but it was from Microsoft. It was from the security team.
Yeah.
They may not have done everything correctly from a PowerShell perspective.
Yeah.
Now, as far as long as they have the help URI filled out in the module manifest, which I don't know if they did, which what you're saying sounds like they didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they didn't do that, then that would not work. I think what I would recommend is, I think what you have is a great suggestion. It seems like this is something that the PowerShell gallery should check and give at least a warning, if not an error, that they have not filled that in.
Yeah, and if it isn't filled in, then put in the URL for the gallery site where the module is published. Then you would be able to put in updated help there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion. I think what I would recommend, because that's a peer team to mine, because the gallery is not open source, but that team also owns PowerShell Get. That might be the easiest way to get their attention, is maybe open an issue in the PowerShell Get repo containing this suggestion. I think it's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
We're talk about PCI running script lines on all uploads. Yes, there has been talks. Again, I don't own PowerShell Gallery, so I can't talk to that. But I can remind that team that was something that was talked about a while back. Let me see. Trying to get PowerShell code. Yes. Will it be both Windows and Linux? Yes, Joel. Yes. The desire is to get it on both Windows and Linux. It will probably be easier, to be honest, to get it on the Windows side than on Linux, because of the fact that the Linux VMs come from third parties. They're not actually produced by Azure or Microsoft. But we're trying to figure that out. Get our nodes. Oh, I see. So it looks like Gallery does do that already. That's cool.
Yeah, I was just looking for like a real-time search documentation for PowerShell, just kind of similar to what .NET Core has.
Yes.
So it's limited to the modules that are currently published to the module browser, and we're working on getting more modules into the module browser all the time. But yeah, right now it's a limited set.
Yeah, Tyler, why don't you follow up on some of those issues?
Yeah, the gallery does run script analyzer results, and if any of you have published a module to the gallery, you'll very much so know that because you get an email from someone on the team that says that you have some script analyzer issues and that you should fix them. So yes, it does.
But does it prevent it from being published?
It doesn't prevent it, no.
Okay, maybe a suggestion, again, you don't work on this gallery anymore, but you can maybe talk to that team. Maybe they should have like a badge that says, has not passed script analyzer or something.
Yeah, so one of the, and I don't want to commit to anything, one of the
we're not committing to anything.
That we had was showing the script analyzer results in the gallery so that people consuming the package can see that what issues exist within that.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that needs improvement, and I know that team has the intention of doing that in the future.
That sounds brilliant. Also, some way of seeing the compatibility with different versions of PowerShell. If you get a PowerShell module from version 6 that uses get VMI calls or stuff like that, it will fail in PowerShell 6. That should be pretty easy to spot.
Yes, so I think the idea we had for addressing that was that could be incorporated into Script Analyzer in some way to say like, hey, you're using this that's available in 5.1, but it's not available in 6, warn in that way.
Yeah, I believe there actually is already an engineer working on rules and Script Analyzer to detect compatibility with PowerShell Core 6.
Yeah.
I don't have an ETA when that will be complete. Let me see. There is a way to search on PS Edition. It is not the most intuitive thing. You can just do a search for the tag PS Edition _core, I think is what it is. And I think today it depends on the authors to add that tag. Let's see. It seems like one of the things we should consider, and I can talk to the engineering manager that owns PowerShell Gallery, is, because I don't think they do this today, is maybe just having a repo for the purpose of getting issues and also providing transparency on their roadmap. I don't know if you guys think that's a good idea. I can talk to them about that, because that way
There's
an avenue to talk to the team directly.
Well, there's a PowerShell Get repo, and then there's also in the docs for PowerShell Gallery, you could file issues there, and Keith Bankston looks at that content.
Yeah. When you say a PowerShell Get repo, that's equivalent to the gallery, or?
Well, so just to be clear, so this is where I'm not sure what the right thing is. The team that owns PowerShell Gallery also owns PowerShell Get. Now, it's not exactly the same set of engineers, but it's the same engineering manager and the same PM. So I think for now, without having a PowerShell Gallery specific repo for issue discussion, I personally would recommend maybe opening issues there, and maybe they can figure out how the best way to address that. And in fact, maybe if there's going to be continuous feedback on the gallery, I'm more than happy to include them explicitly on this call as well, and then we can get some of those folks on here.
But personally, I think the gallery is a great idea. So yeah, why not?
Okay. I'll talk. Just to provide some transparency, like we have a new engineering manager that took over the gallery. I'm sure he's still wrapping up, but we can get him running. So I'll talk to him about that for next call next month.
Could probably feel free to open an issue on the on PowerShell Get side to have a issue repo for the PowerShell gallery, and that will give like even more of a push to make something like that.
Yeah, I'll leave it to the folks on the call to push that. It's always stronger hearing from a non-Microsoft person than from a Microsoft person.
Yeah, and you can also send me a message, and I'll use my limited knowledge on the gallery to answer any questions that I can. By the way, I'm Tyler, that Steve mentioned earlier. I'm taking over for David, filling some pretty big shoes to work on editor services and the VS Code extension. I guess also
See, so we got about a minute left. I don't know if there's any other major things I've missed. I apologize if I missed any questions. Yes, 100% agree with Trevor. David Wilson was a very special individual. Luckily, he still contributes to the project. All right. If not, I think our time's up. Thank you, everyone, for participating on this call. We will try to get this posted as soon as possible, depending on the quality of the recording. And I'll talk to you guys next month. And again, you guys can reach out to me on Twitter if you have anything urgent.